Let's just go through the process of making a Premiere project. And what are some things to keep in mind when you're working in Premiere, when you're making a project? Always save as you go. Now it does have an auto-save function where every few minutes it'll save a version of it. But where's it going to save that version? Well, you guys get to decide. If you render out a preview, where's it going to save that preview? You guys get to decide. Where's the original footage going to go? We'll talk about all of that. And we're going to make a Premiere project, but before we make the project, we're going to prepare the folder that we will use to keep track of everything. Premiere isn't like Photoshop in that if you save a PSD in Photoshop, you have everything you need to open that file. If you send somebody that PSD, they have everything they need to open that file. If you send somebody your Premiere project file, what can they do with it? Can they open it? They can open it. Will they see your footage?
No.
If you,
They'll see the sequence.
they'll see the timeline, but they won't have any of the footage. So, well, let's talk about the process. First off, make a folder. You need to keep yourself organized. Imagine this, guys. Imagine a client comes over to your place and he's like, here's an external hard drive that has all of the footage on it that you need. And he says, all the clips are on this hard drive here. And so you connect it to your computer, you plug the cable in, it mounts up. You create your project file, your Premiere file. You import the clips from the external hard drive. And then you do all of your editing. And at the end of the day, the guy says, OK, I think we're done. So yeah, if you can just render that out. I'm just going to take my hard drive with you. He disconnects it. He goes home. And then you go to render out the video. Can you? No. You need to make sure you have those files. So the first thing is to make yourself organized. So let's make a new folder on the desktop. Last name, first name, week. Let's call it week 9. So download the files, and once you got the files downloaded, go onto the desktop and just make a new folder. Call it last name, first name, week 9. And this is where we're going to save, well, everything for today. But let's make some folders before we even get started. First off, let's make a folder in here called original footage. Well, some people will call it assets. Everyone's going to have their own naming system. I'm going to make a folder called original footage. And that's where we're going to make sure all of that original footage goes to. By keeping it in your project folder, new folder, original footage. By keeping all of your original footage in there, you know it's not going to leave. Okay, so when that guy arrives with the hard drive, connects it up, you grab all the footage you're going to need, you copy it into there so that it's on your hard drive. All right? So once you get the files downloaded, throw them into that original footage folder. You might also have some documentation, some paperwork, some PDFs, some emails, or things that relate to it. So a lot of people will also put a folder in there for either paperwork, documentation, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it paperwork. And when you're done editing your video, is that it? Are you ready to just kind of send that off to the client, or is there something else you have to do? Once you've done all the editing, everything's in place, all your timelines are ready, you got to what?
You have to export it as an MP4.
Or as, well, and so whatever their requirements are, but usually an MP4, usually in the H.264 codec. So let's make a folder called exports. You don't want to get disorganized folders where there's stuff all over the place. So I'm going to make a folder here, and I'm going to call it exports. And that's all we need to make in the Finder. The rest of the stuff is going to be made by Premiere. So I'm going to copy my original footage into there. So once you get the files downloaded, you'll see there's a folder that has 2 video clips and an audio file. I'm going to copy these into my original footage folder. So guys, let's fire up Premiere now. Everyone got the original footage into that original footage folder? Let's fire up Premiere. Let's take a look at the windows that appear. So once you fire up Premiere, we're going to tell it we want to make a new project, and it's going to ask us stuff. First off, what do you want to call this project? I'll just call it week 9. What the heck? Week 9. And it's going to ask, where do you want this project file to be saved? Well, we made a folder on the desktop. We called it last name, first name, week 9. That seems like a promising place. And I'll hit choose. And it's asking some other stuff as well. Video is really, really resource intensive, processor intensive. You might notice when you start working with a lot of video, your fan will spin up on your computer. It'll try to keep it cool because it's running through a lot of stuff. For the video rendering and playback, there's the Mercury playback engine with GPU acceleration. If you've got an older machine or one of the low-end machines that doesn't have a video card, you'll just have the option for the Mercury playback engine. That's their software that they use to play it back. And a GPU, anybody know what that stands for? graphics processing unit, basically a separate video card built into your computer, which sometimes can be more powerful than the main processor, just dedicated to processing out video information. It can be used for other stuff as well, but usually it's just for processing out graphics. Video display format. When you're filming something, it's going to be recording. You can use time code. If you're scanning, let's say you shot, you guys remember film, that floppy spinny stuff that went into movie cameras? You could scan that in and it'll be measured in how many feet and how many frames in you are. So you can choose time code, feet and frames. Usually time code is what most people go with nowadays. Audio. When you're recording sound, you'll notice that you'll be able to zoom in on the audio timeline. You'll actually see the sine wave that makes up the sound. How many times per second is that sound going to get sampled? On CDs, it was 44.1 kilohertz, 44,100 times every second. It looked to see where on that curve the sound file was. There's 88.2, there's 96, there's all different kind of sampling rates. Usually we just put audio samples. Capture. You don't need to worry about capture. Okay, back in the old days of tape, DV tape, digital video tape, you would actually connect the camcorder to the computer. It would take control of it, and it would hit play. It would start importing that digital video stream, and that would be capturing it. You don't need to capture anything anymore. Scratch discs. Let's talk about these fellas. It's going to be creating different files as you're working. It'll be making preview files. It'll be making save files. Where do you want those things to go? Well, hard drives these days are typically quite small. Back in the days of the spinning hard drives, have you ever taken a hard drive apart?
Yep.
Yeah, what was inside? There was spinning metal discs, like a record player, and then a little reed head that went back and forth across the disc. And, you know, 2 terabytes, 4 terabytes wasn't unusual. When they went to, what are the hard drives nowadays? They're not spinning discs. They're, starts with an S. There's a second S. And then a D. Yes, good for you. It stands for solid state drives, no spinning parts. They're a lot faster, they use a lot less battery power, they're a lot less susceptible to shock, but they're also a lot more expensive. So you'll probably find that when you buy a new laptop, like 256 megs, maybe 512, if you really spring for it, maybe you'll get that terabyte drive, but they're often much smaller than they used to be. And video, guys, takes up a lot of space. Remember I said shoot at a fast frame rate, so you can kind of slow that down if you need to. Shoot at a higher resolution than you need to, so you can scale that down afterwards. You're going to need a lot of space for that. And if you've got a laptop that has 256 gigs on it, it's going to fill up really fast. So a lot of people will have an external hard drive connected. You can tell it where you want these things to get saved. Maybe you want to keep some stuff on your internal just for really fast access to it, but then video previews, maybe you've rented out a little section. Your processor, like I said, it's only so fast. Video is really processor intensive. So sometimes when you try to preview something, if you've got some complex transitions, if you've got some layers, some special effects on it, it can play really slow and really chunky. So you might render out a little section as a preview. Where's that preview going to get saved? If you save it on your internal, it'll probably fill up really fast. So you can tell it to save somewhere else. So you can have a folder somewhere and say, okay, all my video previews I'll save on this external hard drive here. My main stuff I'll keep on the internal. So this can kind of save you some space here. The auto saves, every few minutes it's going to auto save. It'll save a version of it. So let's say you've been editing for 8 hours and 6 hours later you're like, you know what, this is just not going well. It looked much better 6 hours earlier. You can go through your save files, find one from 6 hours ago, and you can jump right back to that. It'll basically undo all the stuff you've done for the last 6 hours. Plus, if your machine crashes, it'll go back to an auto save file and you don't lose anything. I think that's about it for here. We won't worry about the ingest settings because you're not going to be ingesting anything. We'll just hit OK. And after you hit OK, it'll come into Premiere, but if you look in that folder that we created, if I look on the desktop, look at this. There is the Premiere project file. Now, oftentimes people get confused and think that this is all they need, okay? This is just a little thing that links to the stuff in here. So all the stuff that is in this should be in your original footage folder. Some people will call it things like assets. So if they've got some photographs or logos and things like that, they'll throw it all into that folder there. But this itself is nothing. It's just a little, it's like a little shopping list. It says, oh, here's all this stuff that I need. If you go shopping and you come back and they say, okay, did you get everything? You say, yes, here's the shopping list. They say, yeah, but where's the actual stuff? This just says what you've done, what files you used. Those are the actual files, okay? If you take a look at this project file, it is really, really small. This is 32 kilobytes. It'll get larger as you go, but it'll rarely go beyond, say, like, a half a megabyte or so. Sometimes people will email that and think that that's the entire project. It's not. All All right, so what was the next step in editing a video? What do you need to do? Yeah, you need to get something in there. There's a few ways we can import. This is our project folder down here. We could just double click in here. We could go File, Import. However you do it, let's bring in all those little video clips that are in there. I'll just do a double click in here. And go to that original footage folder. Okay, guys, whenever you're importing something, you should be grabbing it from in this folder. That way you know that it's right there in your project folder. So I'm going to bring in those 3 files. So this is the project window. You guys remember you got your clips in here. What does this little thing on the corner here mean?
But there's audio.
Yeah, so this clip has some audio in it. What does this one mean? There's no picture. It's just audio. Okay. Now, the thing about these Zoom recorders, these will record audio separately. So you would have an audio file that would go into here, which you would then have to synchronize with the video in there. We'll talk about that in another class. But if you've got the microphone directly connected to your camera, they'll all have audio attached to them. What's the next step in creating something you could export? If we double click this, it appears in the source window, and you can choose an in and an out point. J, K, and L will let you play, pause, rewind. And if you say, okay, for this one here, it's a branch falling down. Maybe you just want the footage of the branch falling. Right before it falls, if you hit I, that sets it as an in point. And you notice that the clip went from like 20 or 30 seconds down to only 14. There's only 14 seconds remaining. If I wanted to set an out point, maybe just after that branch falls, maybe somewhere around here, you can hit O, or you can click that little icon. That'll set it as an out point. And you'll see this clip. It'll go from 14 down to, well, let's see what it ends up as. There's the branch falling. And I'll set that as my out point. Now it's down to 4 seconds. So yes, setting an in and out point is fairly important. And when you're shooting video, what are some tricks to make sure you have enough what they call head and tail space? Start rolling before you actually mean to start recording. So if someone's ready to do an interview or something, don't say record and now start speaking. Start record. Some people will do it in an audio countdown. They'll do like 4, 3, and then they'll start. And that gives you a little bit of a pre-roll beforehand, some head space and some tail space. If you're doing transitions, oftentimes that head and tail will be used to kind of blend from one clip into another. Okay, so you can find your in and out points. What's next? Do we have anything that we could export yet? No, we need to get something into the sequence. What is a sequence? Yeah, so if you've got like a little thing you're going to be putting into the evening news, you can drag something in here, you'll create a sequence. You can have multiple sequences. You can use sequences within sequences. It's kind of a weird way that they do it, and it's a little confusing in this spot over here. First off, how do we make a sequence? You can create a sequence beforehand with nothing in it. You'll see a timeline in an empty sequence. The downside of that is you have to give all the specifications. What sort of resolution is it going to be? Is it 1080? Is it 4K? Whatever. If you drag a clip into the timeline window, it'll create a sequence, and it will take on all the attributes of that clip. So by dragging this look out below, which is now only 4 seconds, into the timeline, it created a sequence, and it took whatever the attributes of that clip were. So that's probably 1080, so it's 1080 pixels high by 1920 pixels wide. And whatever the frame rate is, it's probably 30 frames per second. So all that information got specified onto here. Now, can you mix different resolutions? Like what if you had been filming something and you had your phone set up and you're filming that at 4K, 4,000 pixels wide, and you were also filming with one of these DSLRs, which is only 1080, 1920 pixels wide. Can you use those resolutions together? Well, it depends what you're trying to do. If your finished result is going to be shown on the evening news where it's only going to be 1080 anyway, it's fine. If you're trying to put on a big 4K television, you can put that 1080 in. It would appear, kind of this big in it. You could stretch it out to fill the frame, but it would look a little bit blurry. Yes?
So if you don't do the dragging one, you have to choose the settings manually. How would I do that?
You'd go under File and you'd make a new sequence. You'd put in whatever sizes you need to be, and then you'll have that sequence. So if you knew it was going to be a 4K output, but I don't have any footage to put in yet, you can make a new sequence, use the 4K, whatever the frame rate is. And then let's say somebody gave, we have this old footage from the 1980s, and it's on SD, standard definition, 640 by 480. You could still throw it in. It would just be like, this big in the frame. You'd have to stretch it up, and it would look blurry. But I mean, it's SD. It's going to look blurry anyway. Video games will look great on it, but it'll look blurry. Oh, the fit, it's fitting into this little preview window here. Like say I wanted to, well, maybe I wanted to scale a clip. Let me throw another clip in and maybe I want to scale it around. So if I grab, say, the squirrel on crack and I throw it over top. When I get to here, this clip is taking up too much size. I could try to scale it down, or maybe I want to make it larger, but uh-oh, it's going outside the frame here. The fit fits it within the window here, but if I zoom out, here it is at 10%, here it is at 50%, here it is at 400%, and here it is fit. It fits it to whatever size window you've got there. Now this one is the resolution. When you're playing a video, like I said, it is really processor intensive. You'll probably notice if you have like a laptop, the fan will spin up as it tries to keep itself cool. At full, so let's say this was 1920 by 1080. It'll play it back up here at full resolution. But maybe it's playing sputtery, it's kind of slowing down a bit. Like maybe it's like 4K footage and your computer just isn't powerful enough to play it back. Your video card just can't handle it. You could play it at a half or a quarter resolution. It'll play back more smoothly, but it'll look kind of pixely in the window up here.
That won't affect the final product.
Won't affect the final product. It'll still export full resolution. Yep, okay. Yeah, so if you got a bit of a slower machine and you just want to get the editing done really quick, bump the resolution down, it'll play much smoother, and then when you export, it'll still export the full quality. All right? And beyond that, if you needed to put some sound into this, like say you wanted to get, you had an audio clip or something, you can just drag sound in as well. Now, if you're bringing a video clip in, you don't have to bring in the video as well. Maybe you had two cameras going, and this camera got, maybe it was closer to the subject, and it got better audio than the main camera. You'll notice on this window up here, you can see the video and the audio icons down below. If you grab the whole clip and drag it in, it brings in the video and the audio. If you grab this and drag it in, it'll bring in only the video. Anything above this middle line here is video. Anything below is audio.
I learned that just a few seconds ago.
There you go. So you could drag in just the video. It'll appear above the line. Or if all you need is the audio that was on it, grab this little waveform icon, and you can drag that in, and you only get the audio. Okay? This is only audio, so if we grab that and drag it in, it is only audio. And there we go. So if I were to play that back here, we're going to have this audio overlapped of the squirrel and the lookout below. You'll hear it overlapped. But then when this comes in, the music will start up. Now when you're done, when you're ready to send this off to the client, what's the last step? We have to export it. And that's fairly straightforward. We just go under File, Export, Media. Now what's not necessarily so straightforward is things like format, stuff like that. These are all different codecs. Codec stands for compressor, decompressor. Codec, just like modem stood for modulator, demodulator. So these are ways of compressing the video footage, because if you didn't compress it, you'd be looking at like multi-gigabytes for just like a tiny little video clip. So it has to go through each frame, compress it down, usually using like, kind of along the lines of JPEG. And these are all the different formats that are available, different ways of doing compression. Some of them will be optimized for smaller file size. Some of them will be optimized for easier decoding by the hardware. H.264 is a good one for internet. It's the one that was used for Blu-ray. Usually that's the one that we stick with, the H.264. And your output can be optimized for specific things. Like let's say you were going to send it to YouTube. So let's just do a 720 YouTube there. And you can export larger than your original source. Like let's say your source was SD, standard definition. You could still export it at 1080. It would just be scaling it up and it would look a little bit blurry. If you want to choose where it's going to go, if you want to change its name, now this is totally not intuitive, but here's the output name. And if you want to send it to a different location, you still got to click on the output name. If you click on that little blue thing there, a window will pop up asking you where you want it to go. And we'll send it to that exports folder there. And what do you want to call it? We'll just call this, I don't know, export, what the heck. And then we'll hit save. And at the bottom, you'll notice you got, well, two little things here that would actually output it. Queue and export. Anybody know what the difference between those two is? So let's say you're at the end of the day, a bunch of people are giving you a bunch of stuff that you need to edit down, and it's going to take a long time to render out. Say like one of the things could take like an hour to render. You could hit export, And then you could wait around an hour while it exports, or you could hit Q. It'll drop it into that secondary program in a line, a queue, waiting for it to export. And then you could go and you could open up a second one and you could hit Q. Open up another one, hit Q. You could like line up 8 or 9 things. Then you could go into that Q program, hit Start Q, and it'll start rendering all those things out. You come back in the morning, say 8 hours later, 8 things that are each going to take an hour. By morning, it's done. You're ready to go. If for this, just export would be fine. Once you hit export, it'll render it out and put it wherever you send it.
But using the outside program doesn't affect quality or anything, right?
No, it'll be the same render engine. Yep. It just means that first off, it would free up Premiere for you to come back and keep editing other things with greatly reduced processing power because your computer's going in the background trying to process that other stuff out. But usually it's more like, let's say you're like doing like weddings and stuff, and I edited down 8 weddings today, and each one's going to take 2 hours to render. Well, that's 16 hours of rendering, so you could line that up into queue, hit play, go home, and it'll just keep rendering all night. So I'm just going to hit export. Now, it might take a few seconds. It's not a horribly long clip. If it had a lot of layers, if it had a lot of transitions and stuff, this could take like, a couple of hours to render out, but that's fairly small. And now if I look at that folder I made on the desktop, there's my desktop, there's my week 9 folder. So there's that Premiere project. It's gone up to a whopping 32 kilobytes. Any paperwork documentation I would have saved in there. There's my original footage. This has been completely unaffected. Like the lookout below, it's still a 34-second clip, even though I've taken it down to only 4 seconds and 9 frames in the actual project. And here's the auto saves. Remember I said it'll auto save every now and then. So every few minutes, sometimes it'll pause. It'll go, oh, saving. And you'll be like, okay, let me just wait for it to finish saving. And these will start to accumulate. So let's say after 7 or 8 hours of editing, you're like, oh man, I've got all these auto saves in here and it's just not going well. I wish I hadn't done all those changes I did over the last 3 hours. You can go back to a version from 3 hours ago and it'll undo all those changes. So it's kind of keeping track as you go. Any audio previews or video previews would get saved into here as a separate folder. So these are the only folders that we made. These ones Premiere made, and this Premiere made. And in the exports, that is all you would have to send to the client. That little video there, it's 46 megabytes. You'd send that off to the client. If I hit space, there we go. See, this is why, look at that, it's tail. That guy's on crack, I'm telling you. All right? That's the whole process.